Okay, so here is an update on the Asrock 7900 XTX Aqua Edition with a voided warranty because the water block leaked. If you haven't seen my previous video, please check that out. I seem to be on the blacklist with Asrock because I have sent several emails since the first set of emails and they are not responding to me any longer. So I don't know if they watch this video and they're upset. I have no idea, but I cannot get a hold of them by any means. And I reached out to them because the good news of this whole thing is that the 7900 XTX itself is fine, as far as I can tell. What I did was I took the card and I put it in some rice for I think 3-4 days, and just grasping at straws. I mean, it's basically a paperweight according to Asrock. And went ahead and installed it directly into the Asrock motherboard without the riser, and obviously attached the 8-pin connectors and fired it up, and it posted. Now, obviously, it does not have a cooler on it of any kind, so it gets really hot really fast. All CPUs and GPUs tend to do that, even if they're not even being used. So I shut it down immediately, and it does post. I posted it a couple of times just to make sure it wasn't a fluke. It works. The motherboard does recognize the card. It does have display from the card, so it does, in fact, work. So that is the good news. So it is no longer a $1,400 paperweight. It is basically a AMD board that now I have to figure out what I'm going to do about cooling it. And I already have a solution to that, which does not involve Asrock at all. Here is my solution. So here is the water block, the Asrock water block, the Aqua water block. And this piece here actually goes on top. Then this piece, I had somebody ask me how this came off because they have screws that are hidden down here to get this plate off. And quite literally what I did was I used a business card holder, this thing right here, and I just ran the card holder very carefully up underneath here, going a little further in each time until finally I was able to break it loose. They put a lot of glue on this, so they really don't want you to take this thing apart. They really don't. Maybe they're hiding some secrets. I have no idea, but they really don't want you taking this apart. So what I'm probably going to end up doing is I'm probably going to heat this piece up by itself and apply some that Goo Gone or whatever and try to get rid of all of this, and then put some more reasonable, maybe some more reasonable type of glue on here so that it's not ridiculous. But anyways, so this is the water block. Now it has changed a little bit. So I ended up taking the whole thing apart, and what I found is that these screws here that actually hold the two pieces together. So you've got the acrylic that's on top, and then you have the metal water block that's underneath here. So it's sandwiched together in two pieces. Technically three pieces because this piece also comes off. There's two screws here on the top to remove this. But anyway, so these were very loose. And I think that is what contributed to the failure of this gasket that goes all the way around. There is a black gasket that goes all the way around the water chamber to make sure that water doesn't obviously leak out of the water block. And there are also two gaskets here, which you cannot see, but there's two gaskets here that keep water from coming out of this top part here. In theory, that should work just fine. However, I believe a contributing factor to this leaking was that these were not screwed down very well at all. They really weren't. I took my Allen and I basically, without hardly any force at all, was able to turn these loose. And that's not the way it is, especially when they used some Loctite blue. You can kind of see the Loctite blue in there, there is absolutely no reason why those should have backed out. Now, there were a couple that were actually quite well seated, but most of them were not, and I think that contributed to this gasket failing. You got heat cycles, right? So heat, cool, heat, cool, heat, cool, expand, and contract. And eventually these two pieces, just within probably microns, ended up separating just enough so that water could penetrate this gasket, and then it ended up out all over the place. So what I ended up doing was I figured I've got a couple of options. First of all, the board itself, since I confirmed that the board itself is actually functional and it does post, I looked at, okay, where does Asrock actually get their boards from? Every, AIB has their own, AMD style board so that they can have their own water blocks and all this other stuff. If you look for anything from NVIDIA or AMD, if you look for a water block, you have to know what the brand is. So is it an Asrock? What other companies are out there that PNY, all those other companies, they all make their own version of the AMD cards and NVIDIA cards. So you need to know what kind of water block you're going to need based on the actual card itself. So I was still trying to figure out if this was an actual Asrock design board that they manufactured, a water block that they manufactured, or if they just basically took a water block from another company like EK Water Blocks or whatever, put their name on here and then just slapped it on the card itself. But I couldn't find much information. There's no information on the metal part other than, X4 Aqua. So I couldn't find much information on that at all. So at first I was thinking, okay, well, I'll just get a different water block, a more reputable brand, and I'll put that water block on the 7900 XTX, and then I'll be good. Problem was I could not find a water block that actually looked like this, that had the mounting screws in the same spot. I looked at the different mounting screws, which are under here, and I tried to find one that lined up and matched, and I could not find one. So it's possible that Asrock had a water block company make this. They designed it for their own board, and that's how they did it. I don't know, honestly. Maybe I didn't research it too much. Maybe it's obvious that it's this brand or that brand. I don't know. But anyway, so what I decided to do is I decided to salvage this water block. But I wasn't just going to put it back together, tighten on the screws, and say, okay, here we go again. What I decided to do was take it a step further, because I wasn't 100% sure exactly where and why the leak actually started. It could have been the loose screws, could be a bad gasket, it could be something. I wasn't exactly sure. So what I ended up doing was I took it a step further. I went ahead and I added some liquid nails. Now, liquid nails itself as an adhesive isn't really all that strong. It just isn't. However, it is not what's actually going to be bonding these two pieces together. It is not what's going to be under tension at any time, or any kind of pressure. It can hold up to 250 psi, I think, and the water loop is definitely not 250 psi. It is not really under any pressure at all. So with the liquid nails, what I ended up doing was I ran a bead of liquid nails in between these screws and the gasket itself. So I made the bead, I went all the way around, made the bead all the way around between the gasket and the screws. That way no water could leak out of the screws by any chance. Water could possibly come up through the screws and leak down. I wasn't taking any chances, so I wanted to make sure that I made my own sort of gasket all the way around. Now, by doing so, when I actually set the acrylic on top and then, in a zigzag pattern, went around and, halfway tightened up, then 3/4 tightened up, and then all the way tightened up, and then gave it 1/4 turn past tight. After that, what ended up happening was something pretty cool. The liquid nails ended up spreading out into all of this area here, but the gasket actually prevented it from going into the water chamber. And if you look really close, right up here in this corner, because this was a big, area, and I must not have used as much liquid nails, you can actually see where the liquid nails ends right here. It still makes a seal, but it kind of ends right there because I didn't use enough. So it spread itself out and it filled in all of this area here. The great thing, again, the gasket prevented it from going inside the water chamber, which I was worried about a little bit. This is getting a full 7-day cure, so I figured that even if a little spilled into the water chamber, it's not like it's going to go anywhere, even with the water flowing through it. So I wasn't too concerned about that. I might lose 1/100th of a degree because of flow or something, but I'm using, high flow water pumps. I'm using 480 millimeter radiators, so I really wasn't worried about the water slowing down if a little bit got into this chamber here. I wasn't concerned about that at all. But I didn't have to worry about that because the gasket actually prevented it from seeping into the chamber, which I was really, really happy about. And I used a very small bead. So it was a very, very small bead going all the way around. And like I said, I set it on nice and straight and then just went in a zigzag pattern and just tightened it down, and then it spread itself out. So this gets a full 7-day cure. It has been 5 days so far. I'm giving it its full 7 days. Now, technically, you have to give it, before you expose it to water, I think it's 24 to 48 hours. So technically, I could fire all this up, run some water through this to test it to make sure. But I'm going to give it its full 7 days so that it gets its full cure, its full 250 PSI, just to be on the safe side. I don't want to take any chances on this. So I'm going to wait the full 7 days. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to hook this up to my water loop without the card, and I'm just going to run the water loop for probably 4 or 5 days. I already made some more PEX tubing so that I can run it out of the computer. That way it doesn't leak into the computer. So if anything's going to leak, I mean, my loop hasn't leaked at all. I used these really, really nice Thermotake fittings and elbows and so on. They have like 3 gaskets inside each one of these. So I've never had a problem with any of these leaking when they're fully seated, but this unfortunately leaked. So I'm not really worried about my water loop leaking at all. I'm more worried about this leaking. So I'll have just this, hooked up to a water loop, and I'll leave it running for 3, 4, 5 days. And I'll keep an eye on, obviously, the obvious part, if water's actually dripping down here. That's going to be pretty obvious if I'm losing water. I'm going to mark my reservoir so I can see when it's actually running, if I'm actually losing a slow leak or something like that. And I'll let it run for 3 or 4 days. Now, of course, it's not going to get its heat cycles, but it'll be pretty obvious from the get-go if I'm seeing any water at all come in here, because the liquid nails should prevent any water from getting past this gasket. I mean, it should. But if the liquid nails for some reason fails, for whatever reason, then I should be able to see it. It's not like it's going to suddenly go and just blow right out and then I'm going to have a leak everywhere. I'll see it start to bubble out into the liquid nails, making pockets and so on, before it becomes a disaster. So now I do have the card mounted vertically. I have it on a stand. This is actually the stand that I use. It's mounted vertically in the machine, or in the computer, that is. So I will stand up vertically because that's how I'm going to have it. I don't want to sit down and then it runs fine, and then when I go to stand it up it starts leaking. So I'll have it standing up. I'll have it hooked up to my water loop. I'll leave the pump running. The computer will be off. I'll just have the pump and power supply running, and I will make sure there's no leaks. Now, if that passes the test, then what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to be replacing all of these pads. I made a comment before, and it seems to be well known on Reddit, that Asrock does an absolute terrible job of applying these thermal pads. And it makes me wonder if the rest of their products aren't like this, even if you're not liquid cooling with Asrock. It just makes me wonder if a air-cooled Asrock card has this same issue, because I don't see how one person is just in charge of the Aqua and, they're the ones that messed all this up. This just makes me wonder if more of their video cards aren't like this. But there's some posts on Reddit about it. I quite literally pulled this off like this off of the card, and I left this completely intact. So you can see how it actually looks when I pulled it off. I didn't wiggle it off, I didn't shake it off, I didn't rotate it or rock it or anything else. I literally took the whole thing like this and took it off. And this is quite literally what you see. And I kind of wondered too, because you can kind of see, if you're looking at the card, you can kind of see this blotch coming out here a little bit. Well, I noticed it, but I thought maybe it was some sort of adhesive or something, and I really honestly wasn't too worried about it. I didn't think that it was actually the thermal pads, because this actually sits on top of the card, and I'd always been kind of looking at that thinking, maybe it's just a bigger thermal pad or something. Well, I should have returned the card immediately and had them replace it or something, but I wasn't thinking. I was too excited about getting the card, so that's basically what I ended up doing. So it made me wonder, and now I know because I took it off, and you can see where some of the components didn't even have any thermal pad on them. It kind of bunched up. It went, and it was like a snake here. Look at this part right here. Half of it's not even covered. So, and you can see the little etches that they make where the pads actually go. So I'm really confused who put this together and said, okay, that's good enough, and just threw it together. I'm really, honestly, legitimately confused. And if you recall, the other comment I made was the 2 pounds of thermal paste that they put on the GPU, which basically made this whole thing pretty much worthless. I'm pretty sure that if it wasn't for the liquid cooling, then this thing would be overheating like crazy. The hotspot temperatures were fairly elevated, but I was hearing that that's somewhat normal. But no, not anymore. That's definitely not normal. So they put way too much thermal paste on this, and they didn't align the pads properly, and it's just upsetting that this is the quality that you get for what is essentially a $1,400 card. And not everybody had these problems. Looking at Reddit, there were people who were like, my card's been working great for 6 months, 8 months, 10 months, no problems there. And other people are having problems with overheating and hot spot temperatures and so on. So, it's probably just one of those deals where sometimes you get lucky, sometimes you don't. But in general, it's well known that Asrock puts way too much liquid, or not liquid, but thermal paste on their products, and that's something that they definitely need to deal with. So, at any rate, I'm going to give this the full 7 days. I ordered new thermal pads from Thermal Grizzly. They're 1.5 millimeters, which I think might be a little bit too thick, but 1 millimeter I think is too thin. Looking at these are squished, but they're at least a millimeter. Even in a squished state, they are definitely at least 1 millimeter. They're not a half millimeter. They're at least 1. So I went ahead and went with the half millimeter, the thermal pads from Thermal Grizzly, and I went with the I think it's the Cognate, something like that, for the thermal grease, the pink stuff from Thermal Grizzly. I got 2 bottles of that so that I can apply a nice bead on the GPU, and we'll see if that helps. So I have all new thermal pads. I got a big square of it so I can cut little lines and so on, because these are nicely marked. I can just cut a square and then just apply it. They're self-adhesive, so I'll just bam, 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 do all that, clean it all up with alcohol, really, really good. Apply the thermal pads, and then I'll be able to apply that to the card, and then hopefully not have a problem. But very, very disappointed in Asrock. The card looks beautiful. Credit where credit is due. The card looks beautiful. I mean, when this thing is put together, like so, and it's lit up because it has RGB, it looks fantastic. You can see the GPU, you can see the GPU cooler right in the middle there. It looks awesome. That was one thing that drew me to this. I have always bought AMD products, always been, a Radeon fan, Always been on Team Red. I'm running a 7950X3D currently. I have always used AMD all the way back to the early days of the 64-bit processors, the Athlons and so on. So I've always been Team Red when it comes to their video cards and when it comes to their CPUs. This is definitely not an AMD mess up. This is an Asrock mess up. Asrock took an AMD 7900 XTX and they put this water block on here, and they did engineer a nice overclock BIOS for it, and it is, besides the Red Devil, I think this is the fastest 7900 XTX you can get. And when you have a serious water loop, you can push this thing to 15, maybe even 20% beyond its capabilities. 15% on the power. I was regularly running 3108 on the frequency, and I had the memory tuned up to, I think, 2600, 2700, something like that. And it was perfectly fine, perfectly stable. And I had the monitoring in the corner so that I could see the temperatures, and it ran great. So as far as aesthetics and performance, Asrock did a good job here. The problem is their assembly of the water block leaves a lot to be desired. And I'm just upset with Asrock that they're basically giving me the cold shoulder now, and they're not willing to do anything. If they would send me a new water block, I would be okay with it. But at this point, I've already basically repaired this using my own techniques. Whether they work or not, we'll see. But I've basically repaired this using my own techniques. There's no point in even contacting Asrock anymore because it's already been taken all apart. So they're going to say, oh, sorry, you took it all apart anyway, so we can't honor a warranty anyway. So, that ship has sailed, basically. There's nothing more that I can do with Asrock. I know that I won't be buying any of their products anymore. I will probably have this card if it turns out that it does function fine from here on out. I'm probably going to be running this for the next 2 or 3 or maybe even 4 years. But I'm not going to be buying another Asrock product again, that's for sure. I don't care how beautiful it is. I don't care how overclockable it is. I'm not going to. I will buy a reference board and then do my own water system on top of it, because I definitely would not go to the point of not tightening these down all the way that they're supposed to be. It's whatever. This is terrible. And I have really been a fan of Asrock products. I have 2 of their previous cards, video cards, and I have 2 of their previous motherboards. Right now I'm on the Tai Chi, the 650 E, and it's a well-designed board. It seems to be working just fine. So I'm just a little bit upset that, after supporting them, they do something like this. And it is what it is. So I'm going to leave it at that, and I will post an update video maybe this weekend with this thing running. I'm going to wait another day or 2, and then I'm going to hook up the water loop, let that run for 3 or 4 days. If I got no leaks, I'll reapply it to the board itself, and I'll get it up and running. And mount it vertically as I did before, and hopefully I won't have any problems. I'm still worried about this green goop that seems to like to build up right in this area. I'm hoping that it's all gone now. I'm hoping that it's taken care of. I haven't seen any new green goop build up. It's basically some kind of a protective enamel, a metallic enamel that they put on here, and it reacts with water, unfortunately, and turns it all green. It's a goopy green. So I'm hoping that it's pretty much flushed out, because if I have to take this thing apart again, then obviously I have to break the seal on the liquid nails, and I gotta wait 7 days again, and it's just, what a pain in the butt. Asrock really did not do a very good job with this water block. Aesthetically, they did an awesome job, but performance-wise, as far as reliability, terrible job. So that is an update video for you regarding this, and I will get you another update video as soon as I have things up and running. So there you have it, and take care.